Hi everyone. This is Dr. Chaparro at LSL LCSW, Social Work Exam Prep Bootcamp. I am excited because I have my first guest for our YouTube channel. It is Dr. Melissa Laracuenta-Hernandez. Welcome, Dr. Laracuenta.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So
I'm
happy to
really
see
excited.
you.
It's good to see you too.
I wanted to let everyone know Dr. Laracuenta I've known for many years. We met during her one of her practicums
Mhm.
at our OM Inc. facility. And she has become not only a friend, but also a mentor. She has helped me and guided me through a lot of my professional decisions. And we're always collaborating and helping each other out. She's also assisted a numerous of my social work boot campers, students, assist with many different areas such as accommodations or just other situations that are impeding them from passing the social work license exam. So I wanted to invite her to discuss many important parts of the exam that has nothing to do with exam strategies, but there are many factors that unfortunately distract people from passing the exam. So today we're mainly going to talk about ADHD and the social work license exam. Before we get started, I want Dr. Laracuenta to tell us about herself, her background, and some hobbies and some fun facts about you.
Thank you for the really warm welcome. And I just want to say that I have appreciated all of our collaborations and our longstanding, professional and personal relationship over the years.
Thank
So
you.
I've been a practicing psychologist for I had to count. It's been about 15 years.
Um,
And most of my work has been kind of split between therapy and testing. I do a lot of testing. Testing has really become more of a specialty for me because as I meet people in particular, and you and I have talked about this in particular, as I've met many of your bootcamp students over the years, we've come to find that a lot of people have a lot of difficulties with their attention, with their concentration. And when we start to look at their history, they really fit a profile for ADHD that they didn't realize was a problem. They've been coping so well with it over the years. So
yeah.
that has definitely become kind of a specialty of mine. Fun facts about me. I love many things. I'm very creative. I love crafty things. I was actually just on a really fun TikTok site that
Wow,
has all sorts of
TikTok.
fun craft. Yes, I love TikTok. I love crafty things. I love to bake. Um,
I heard you're a
anything
great
that's
baker.
Thank you. Thank you. I try. I try. I also have my own attentional difficulties at time, and I find that baking is very helpful because it has very specific instructions for you to
Mm-hmm.
follow, but also then you can be creative in your own ways. So it's a lot of fun.
That's interesting. It's
Mhm.
interesting because sometimes there are areas I find that clients or people in general are inattentive, and then they can become very focused with certain tasks and activities.
Mhm.
So that I guess it's that part of the brain, whereas maybe they have more of like a creative side where they can
Absolutely.
right.
There's been a lot of talk and discussion about the concept of being neurodivergent.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, that speaks to that in terms of I think it frustrates people because on the one hand, everyone thinks that ADHD means that you can't pay attention to things and you can't focus. It's not really true. Um, it's about it being difficult to focus on things that are, for lack of a better way of putting it, boring or that they don't find interesting. So
Mm.
on the one hand, people with ADHD can be very focused for very long periods of time on things that they find very interesting, very stimulating. But on the other hand, other things that are a little bit more boring or kind of like a little less entertaining, that's where they struggle. So I think that with creative things, it can be easier to focus and kind of what's the thing that people say, go down a rabbit hole and kind of
Right.
like start really getting hyper focused and very almost like it seems obsessive to people, that it's usually about creative things. That's kind of part of being kind of the concept of being neurodivergent, where there are these
Neurodivergent.
Yeah, there are these particular areas where you can be like very, very focused, and then other areas where you struggle.
Thank you for that interesting information. Before I ask you about a little bit more about yourself, because I want to know more about you also, could you tell us who is considered neurodivergent? I know ADHD, but I also believe there are other um areas that are considered neurodivergent.
Yes.
Okay.
Neurodivergent has been a little bit, it's not a new term, but it's
Mm-hmm.
something I think that people have become more aware of.
Okay.
So people that are considered neurodivergent are people that process information differently than others. So for example, people with ADHD, people that are functioning on the autism spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
anyone that has any kind of sensory integration difficulties or is very quote unquote sensory,
Mm-hmm.
where they get very overwhelmed with things. Sometimes people will consider someone that might consider themselves an empath. They can also be considered neurodivergent. So it's basically people that are processing information, emotions, things like that in a different way. Sometimes it can be more intense for them. Sometimes it can
Mm-hmm.
be less intense.
Okay, I get it. That's interesting, right? Yeah. I didn't know it was always around only because I've heard a lot about it recently in comparisons and before. And I know that you are a licensed psychologist.
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit more about why you chose psychology and your
Oh, good
graduate.
question. I think
Mm-hmm.
I've always been interested in psychology. I remember taking a class in high school. We had to take a psychology class, and I just thought it was really interesting how you can get an understanding of how people really think and how they feel, and then combine that with kind of figuring out how they act on the outside, because how we feel and think on the inside can be very different from how we behave on the outside. So that kind of piqued my interest. And then when I went to college, we had to do an internship, and I interned at a hospital where I worked at a program for teenagers that had just come out of the hospital. They had been hospitalized for, usually it was something where there was some sort of self-injurious behavior, or they were a danger to themselves or others. And I'll be honest with you, it was so much fun. It was so much fun to be able to help people in this particular way, to have an understanding of how they think and how what they feel, and then try to help them to navigate their lives. I thought that was really, really fun and interesting. So I'll be honest, on a little bit of a whim, I applied to graduate school, and I got in and I went, and it was a really hard but a really amazing experience.
Nice. Excellent. And when you went to graduate school, what was your dissertation?
Ooh, my
Mhm.
dissertation, I'm so traumatized by the concept of
I
my
know.
dissertation.
It is a traumatizing thing. Sorry.
It's a traumatizing thing because you have to work on it for so long. But my dissertation was about how anxiety and depression can transmit between parents and their children.
Mm.
So, for example, if a child is depressed, will then the parent then kind of become depressed as well? Or if a parent is anxious, will the child then become anxious as well? And it was really interesting, actually. We looked at the differences between mother, daughter, father, son, um, and vice versa. And there were definitely differences in terms of the way that anxiety plays itself out, and may be a little contagious and may
Mm.
transmit between parent and child. It was a really interesting dissertation, and also made me very thoughtful about how relationships really matter.
Right.
For all of us, relationships really matter. And, in psychology in particular, we look at those relationships between you and your parents as being the ones that kind of form the way that then you go out into the world and
Mm.
form relationships with other people. So my dissertation really came out of that interest, and really um has transformed the way that I look at my work, whether I'm doing testing or therapy. I really always ask a lot of questions about that, about the relationships that people have with their
Mm.
closest people around them.
Oh wow. That's very interesting, and I'm pretty sure it has a lot of influence on their behaviors.
Absolutely. Yes. Even and with ADHD, it's very similar. If you're
Mm-hmm.
brought up with a parent who has ADHD that they haven't learned how to manage it, you know, by definition, your world may feel a little bit more chaotic. It may be kind of a little bit more exciting because it feels like your parent at the drop of a hat kind of will get up and do things that they're interested in, but also it can be a little bit chaotic. And then someone may grow up and kind of still function like that because that's what they know.
I believe it and I know it, and it's very true. And speaking of ADHD, let's talk about ADHD.
Okay.
And what does ADHD stand for? And let's, since this is also an exam prep channel, can you teach us about what we would see if we were looking through the DSM-5 and we open up the page of ADHD? What type of criteria, symptoms, and duration are we looking at?
Okay. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And it's an overall term that basically describes all difficulties in functioning with paying attention, concentrating, being hyperactive, and with organization. And then there are 3 different types. The types are kind of basic. There's inattentive type, there's hyperactive type, and then there's combined type where the person might have symptoms of both inattention and hyperactivity. So I'll talk about hyperactivity first because it's the one that I think gets the most attention and that people think of when they think about ADHD. They think about someone that's incredibly hyper, that has a lot of trouble staying still. They have to constantly be moving. They talk all the time. They interrupt other people. They go from one topic to another or one activity to the other. And it seems like almost, if you see it in younger children, it's almost like seeing like a little Tasmanian devil. They kind of like spin a lot. That's what people typically think about with ADHD, someone that's very, very hyperactive. And because they're hyperactive, they have trouble doing things like sitting still in school, focusing on a test, for example. They may feel the need to move a lot. They may squirm a lot in their seat. Constantly, the things that I see in adults a lot will be a constant movement where when you're sitting with them, they're always tapping a pen, or they always have to be chewing gum, or they, a lot of people will move their foot a lot when they're trying to sit still. They're constantly moving. Those are the kinds of things that you would see. Now, all of us do that to an extent. For someone with ADHD that's the hyperactive type, it has to affect their functioning. It has to make it more difficult for them to sit for an exam or function at work or, function with friends. It's not, we all have hyperactive parts of our lives and kind of like behaviors, but it has to be something that's really affecting the way that you function. So that's hyperactive type. Inattentive type is the type that I most often find with when I've worked with some of your boot campers, or when I work with young adults or adults. It's the kind of thing that's very easily overlooked because of something that happens inside of them. So they're very inattentive. They have a lot of trouble paying attention to small details. They have difficulties completing tasks. In particular, if they have more than 1 or 2 steps to them, they get a little lost. And then by kind of like step 3, they've totally lost what they're doing. They can be very disorganized or have a lot of trouble with organization, and really start to avoid tasks that require them to pay attention. And a lot of times it's very highly prevalent amongst people who identify or are female, and also is very easily overlooked because it's something that's happening inside. People don't see it. So it's the kind of thing that people can struggle with for many years and really not identified until they have a conversation with someone like you or I, where, maybe we're opening the conversation to say, maybe you have inattentive ADHD and you just don't realize it. No one pointed it out. And then combined type is basically,
which happens, right?
Yeah, it happens a lot. It happens a lot. More often than not, I'm finding, in particular with those that identify as female, they have gone their whole lives struggling without anyone really knowing. It's the people that have always been told, just work harder, just study longer, just, try to be more organized. And I don't think people realize that if they could, they would. They're really struggling.
That's a shame, because I often hear that, or hear people saying, I know I have to just do more. I just have to try again and study more. or this, and lo and behold, maybe they lack these type of skills that might help them
Absolutely.
once they're identified as having an attentive type or even hyperactive, right?
Yeah. And
Or
ADHD
combined.
it is a neurological disorder. It
Mhm.
is something about the way that your brain, in terms of like talking about it like neurodivergent, the way
Brain
that your brain,
normalities. Mhm.
yeah, it's, your brain is wired differently. And there are
Mhm.
things that you can learn how to do and that you can work on to make life easier, to make certain types of tasks easier. And at the end of the day, your brain and your body are just wired differently.
Mhm. Yeah. Just have to learn to adapt. But you need a professional like Dr. Laracuenta-Hernandez as an ADHD coach, that she has all the different types of, and we're going to talk about that, types of strategies to assist you with that. And for combined, that would be basically both types of
Combined is
symptoms.
basically both. Yes. And I will say that it's not as usual, like as people get to adulthood, that I'm diagnosing that, because usually with hyperactive, because you can see it more,
Hmm.
because it's
Hmm.
something that people see more, it's usually identified when someone is much younger.
Hmm.
However, if someone has been brought up in a very, very structured environment, where maybe they went to very small schools, maybe they went to private
Mm.
school, maybe they've always worked in smaller organizations where they didn't have to do as much in terms of keeping themselves organized and together, and there was more, or they worked in an environment where being hyperactive worked for them, and
Hmm.
that was kind of part of where it was a strength for them to be that way.
Hmm.
um it's not necessarily usually picked up as late in terms of adulthood, but yes, it's a combination of both.
Okay. And what type of therapies or therapeutic approaches helps clients with who have ADHD or ADHD symptoms? Maybe they don't meet the full criteria, but
Right.
ADHD or symptoms of ADHD.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I'm going to say the thing that's obvious that everyone thinks of first. Everyone thinks of medication first.
Mm-hmm.
And absolutely, that is something that is useful and that, can help. However, it's not a magic solution. It's something that people have to really do a consultation with a neurologist or a psychiatrist or someone that's really their specialty. And, it can be helpful. However, that's not the answer. As you said, there are things
Mm-hmm.
that can be done on the day to day. So for younger children, so for example, if any of your boot campers have younger children of their own that they see might be struggling with these kinds of things, the two things that are very, very helpful are behavioral therapy and social skills. So
Mm-hmm.
behavioral therapy will work on the child learning the connection between their behaviors and consequences.
Mm-hmm.
And also they have to live in a more structured environment. So
Mm-hmm.
it might be the kind of thing where the parent struggles because their child every morning forgets to brush their teeth or forgets to do like basic things. They get lost. They can get lost,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in some of those daily
Wow.
routines. So, there are very simple things like create a little picture, and write it down and put it next to the sink. Okay, these are the 3 steps that you do. You turn on the water, you put your toothpaste on your toothbrush, you brush your teeth. Like those kinds of very simple things can really make those routines much more seamless and can be very helpful. And someone that is an ADHD coach or behavioral therapist can absolutely work on that.
Mm-hmm.
And also for younger children, social skills are very useful in terms of like a social skills group or a trainer, because for those people who have ADHD and or are considered neurodivergent, they're not going to learn certain types of
Mm-hmm.
socialization skills.
Have a
So
hard time.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about it. They have a hard time paying attention, so they don't pick
Mm-hmm.
up on some of the smaller things that other people will notice and pick up on.
Mm-hmm.
So for younger kids, definitely behavioral therapy and social skills. When we're talking about young adults and adults, there's a couple of different things. There's basic organizational coaching, where you learn things like breaking up tasks into smaller pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's the Pomodoro method, which is very helpful.
Oh,
The Pomodoro method is basically
interesting.
setting a timer and segmenting your day into smaller chunks. So if you have to, work on some sort of a task, you set a timer for 20 minutes. You do as much as you can on that one task in 20 minutes, and then you take a 5-minute break. You take a 5 to 7 minute break so
So
that
these
you
are
get,
things you work on with your clients?
yes, absolutely. We work on doing those things and incorporating it into their lives at all times. That's also called, I learned a new term the other day, monotasking. So
Mm.
multitasking, usually people with ADHD think that they're really good at multitasking. They're not. They're
Oh, darn
good at
it.
doing multiple things at the same time, but none of those things actually ever gets done. So,
Mm.
it might be,
Monotasking?
yes,
Mm.
monotasking is the way to go. Monotasking is hyper focus one thing at a time.
Mm.
And Pomodoro method, 20 minutes. Set a timer. I'm just going to do this one thing for 20 minutes, and then I'm going to have a break. And then you go do something else. And then you come back another 20 minutes, go do something else, another 20 minutes.
Mhm.
It forces your brain to learn how to focus. And also it forces your brain to not get so overstimulated. So during those time periods, excuse me, during those time periods, you're going to minimize anything that's
Mhm.
distracting. So for most of us, our phones are incredibly distracting.
Oh, shoot, you're right.
Turn it off, or if it has to be off, if it has to be on, most phones have some sort of
I
a
turn off like every notification.
I do too. I
I
turn
don't
all
have
of my
any of those
notifications
on.
off, or even like on iPhones, and I think that Androids have a similar function. There are these little focus modes. I'm going to put in quotations. That's what they use. They're
Focus
called focus
modes.
modes. So I have mine, for example, when I'm on work mode, the only notification that can come through is something from my calendar to let me
Right,
know that I have,
right.
another appointment or another thing
Thank you for
coming
that
through.
tip.
Yeah, it's really great. Or, so for example, if I have a family member that, I know that if they call, it's somewhat of an urgent matter, I have them so that it will interrupt me for something very important. Other than that, everything's turned off.
Mm. These are great tips. I hope whoever's watching is writing this down,
I hope so. I hope so.
because it's important. And also, I remember that when I was in St. John's University for undergrad, I would go to the library, go all the way to like one of the top floors, and they would have special seating, and it would literally be like a box, like
Yeah.
not a box, but just like nothing, like they're, I guess you could say, boarded up on the sides. So I spent like 4 years. That's how I would study. And then when I was out, I was like so used to doing that. So now when I'm studying sometimes or reviewing, I'm like, I look around because I guess feels like that open space will allow me to just be like, and let me fix those, whatever, like this. It just like, I think I was spoiled by those big like boxes around me,
Mhm.
that now that's after that I'm like, there's just too much space and too much going on around me. Like I prefer to have like no type of distraction. I think because I was kind of trained like that for 4 years. So that's
Absolutely.
another
Yeah.
thing, maybe, to like, what does your environment look like? Am I studying in a place that I could say, well, you know what, maybe I feel like maybe making that favorite smoothie of mine. As soon as
Hmm.
you make the smoothie, like, let me make that sandwich that I whatever. Then
Right.
if I think it also depends on the environment where you're studying. For those 20 minutes, like the least distraction possible. The phone is number one, I think, like you suggested.
Absolutely. Yes. And like you said, anything around you that can be distracting. So I know even for
Or
myself,
people too.
and people, I find people very distracting. So even like you said, when I was in undergrad and in grad school, when I went to the library, I couldn't study in an open space because movement distracts
Right.
me. Because then I my eyes automatically pulled up and then I want to look around. I used
It's
to have to,
easy.
absolutely. So even if I didn't have a space that could be enclosed, like what you're describing, I would have to face myself towards a wall or towards something where there's not as many distractions. And then I mean, this is back in the day before we had noise
Right.
canceling headphones,
Oh
but
yeah, I didn't
at the
even know about
time,
that.
exactly. But at the time, I would put headphones on, even if I didn't have anything playing,
Oh, that's
or I would
interesting
put,
too.
actually, I will say that there is a lot of literature, classical music, piano, playing piano in the
All right.
background, or playing, classical guitar, like on a very low volume. If you listen to that while you're doing focused work, that can actually really help you to focus as well. There's a lot of literature that supports it.
Yeah. I
Um,
think it has to do with your
yeah.
brain.
Yes.
With people with ADHD brains
Yes.
are able to focus when they have like some type of distracting noise in the background.
Yes. I do that all of the time, where I'll put noise canceling headphones on, but I put on music that that ironically just helps me to focus because it's kind of drowning out the external,
And
noise.
I think, I'm not sure, but for whoever's watching, I believe when you take the exam, you can request, or they might have the noise
They
cancellation
do.
headphones.
They
They
do
do.
have noise cancellation headphones. If
Okay.
they
Just make
don't
sure
have,
wherever wherever
yes,
you're scheduled to take your exam, try to call ahead, find out, in case that might be very helpful, and start studying already with those headphones, so that you are, you're used to it by the time you get to that exam room.
absolutely. I mean, in terms of from like a studying perspective, when you're studying, you should almost like recreate what the
Yeah,
testing room is going to be like.
right. That's a good
So,
idea.
absolutely, if you're going to be at your desk, for example, make sure there's nothing else on your desk that's distracting, that you just have the screen in front of you, that, if you're going to request noise canceling headphones, to practice putting them on, take timed exams. So
Yeah.
pretend as if, I mean, it's very hard to sit for, a long period of time, but even if you're able to try to start sitting for an hour and just sit and pretend like you're taking the exam, as if you cannot get up to be distracted. There's nothing in front of you. They don't let you to bring your phones in, so you can't have that with you anyway.
Right. So might
And
as well
really,
start practicing that way.
exactly, and just try to recreate the
Environment.
testing environment. Yeah.
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 Thank you, Dr. Melissa. My next question is, how do you evaluate ADHD? I know that we talked about all the different symptoms, and you say maybe people can have all different symptoms, but specifically, if you do meet all these criteria that you taught us today, how would a psychologist evaluate? What do you do to evaluate and to diagnose ADHD?
Okay, so what we do is we do a full evaluation that has really four parts to it. One part, the kind of the most basic part that is intuitive to any social worker, is you do a very thorough psychosocial. You start off with doing a very thorough psychosocial history to ask questions about not just how you're functioning now, but along your life. What have been your struggles? What has been easy for you? What was school like? Did you go to school in a very small environment, or was it a larger? Were you the child that everyone called messy? Was your desk in school always a mess, or was it very, neat and organized? So we'll really go in depth to really look from as much as as much as people kind of remember. And also sometimes I will ask people, can you go back and ask, whoever raised you, can you ask them some questions about what you were like when you were growing up? Because ADHD is a diagnosis that it's not something that just comes up, semi-randomly in adulthood. The only way that something that looks like ADHD would come up very suddenly would be if, someone had some sort of a sudden brain injury, or they're suddenly depressed, they're in a major depressive episode, or they're suddenly having a bout of very intense anxiety. Then you can have symptoms that look like ADHD. So we ask all these questions to take a look at, all of these different things that can look like ADHD. The other three things that we do are the testing itself. So one thing is we administer cognitive tests. So what people think of as IQ tests.
Right.
What IQ tests really are, they're looking at different parts of the way that your brain works and the way that you learn. So we're going to look at your memory. We're going to look at your vocabulary and your verbal skills, your nonverbal skills, how quickly you work, or how quickly or how slowly you work, because all of those things give us some pieces to figure out if you fit a profile for ADHD.
Right.
Then we do academic tests just to see where some of your academic skills are, because there are some basic academic deficits that can happen when you've had ADHD for a long period of time. That was, especially if it wasn't treated, there are certain things that can happen academically. And then we're going to administer some questionnaires that ask straight out, about, how frequently you're experiencing symptoms of ADHD, for how long. And we're going to also ask about things about depression, anxiety, learning disabilities.
Okay,
And then we put
thanks.
it all together. Yeah, then we put it all together.
So it's like a
And then
battery of different tests. Okay. All of that put together, you assess, you score, you interpret the results, and let's say a person doesn't meet the full criteria, you could still
Yes,
assist them, obviously, because they're struggling with those symptoms of ADHD, specifically
absolutely.
for the
Usually,
exam.
yes, we give a lot of tips. We give a lot of recommendations and a lot of tips. Even if someone doesn't meet full criteria for diagnosis, obviously, if they're coming for testing, they're struggling in
Right.
one area or the other. So we're going to give, very detailed recommendations and tips.
Mm.
It might mean, working with someone else for a short period of time to really vote like a coach to really work on some of the
Mm-hmm.
skills. It might be basic things in terms of, shifting their environment, trying to make things a little bit more simple, a little bit more organized. Sometimes there are a lot of really simple things that can be done.
Right, because either way, with a diagnosis or even having the symptoms, they need to be addressed, and
Absolutely.
it will help them for their exam and also for life on just like everyday life. Like you're gonna live a more positive life if you can address this and find ways to um finish those tasks that you might have left
Mhm.
unfinished for a long time, which happens to everybody. But with appropriate tips and skills, you can really like move forward with a lot of things. And in terms of ADHD, I know about accommodations, special accommodations. Can
Yes.
ADHD be one of those diagnoses that helps with accommodations?
Yes, absolutely. With a diagnosis of ADHD, one can get test accommodations, one can get accommodations in school, and there are several different accommodations that can be granted as a result of having the diagnosis. Yes.
And what if they have not had a history, meaning they were not diagnosed as in childhood or had accommodations prior? Let's say if this all of a sudden is a struggle right now, is it easy to get those accommodations during adulthood, or is it something that you should
I
just work more on the addressing the symptoms then?
I think it depends. It depends on um how much the symptoms are really affecting someone's functioning. If it's something
Mm,
that's more mild, then it's a little harder to justify accommodations. Usually what I do is I try to, as I think about when I write my reports, I think about it like I am building a story
mhm.
that has a beginning, a middle, and an end that all flow and that all makes sense. So the way that I write things will be such that I will explain along the way, this is why this never was picked up. This was
Mhm.
never picked up because the person functioned well enough. They had a bunch of different accommodations that they were given along the way that people never identified as accommodations
Right, that happens
were.
also.
And then
Mm-hmm.
now we've come to the point where they don't have those things anymore and they're struggling. So I usually try to build a story that makes sense so that it's not really questionable. An example of something like that happened kind of recently was someone went to private school,
Mm-hmm.
and private schools have a lot more leeway in terms of
Yeah.
the kinds of helps and supports that they can give.
Mm-hmm.
So when I started asking the person questions, they had accommodations all of their
Mm-hmm.
life. They had
Mm-hmm.
very small classes. They were given an extra tutor.
Extra
They had
time and stuff,
extra
but not
time.
written, not just like written down. It was
Exactly,
just something that
exactly.
they gave them.
Exactly. Then they went to college where they didn't have that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't built into kind of like the programming. And then they were failing. And
Mm-hmm.
it made it look as if they were purposely not doing their work or purposely getting distracted. But that absolutely wasn't the case. When I started to look at
Mm-hmm.
the history, that's why the initial psychosocial is so important,
Mm-hmm.
because you
I
have to
see.
get a sense of it's not just simply, oh, you got straight A's in school. Okay, great. You have to have an understanding, how did they get those grades then that they're not able to get now? So that person did really well elementary, middle, high school because they were in
Mm-hmm.
private school where they had all kinds of supports. And then once they didn't have them anymore, they were really struggling.
Wow, that's interesting. You are great. You are a whiz. But speaking of accommodate, I know there are many different types
Yes.
of testing, cognitive and everything. And all of that is related to accommodations for the exams. could we invite you back, or your staff, one of your team,
Absolutely,
talk
absolutely. I
about
can
like
come back,
specifically about
or yes, I can
accommodations?
come back, or one of the people that I work with on my team can come back. We
Okay.
work with accommodations all of the time for all kinds of different professions: social work, psychologists, lawyers, medical schools. There's a lot of people in medical schools that need a lot of accommodations. So yeah, absolutely, yes.
Okay, and I also want to thank you because I know you've helped so many of my bootcamp students in the past. We've been working together, I think, for I don't know,
It's been a long
but
time.
you've helped so many of them able to get accommodations, or even if they weren't, because sometimes, it's not, even though Dr. Laracuenta does an amazing job with the testing, cognitive testing, and the report writing, it's really up to the board to grant that accommodation. So let's
Yes.
pretend, even if it doesn't fall through, which really rarely happens, she is able to help you to address those issues. Because no matter what, even with accommodations, you still have to learn how to um, work on your, I don't want to say the disability, but it is in a way,
Right.
because that's what's unfortunately getting in the way most of the time from passing. But so you have to address those issues. So that Dr. Laracuenta, is also an experienced professional with addressing those issues, not just accommodations, because that's just part of it. Just like you said, the medication helps, but you need to address the symptoms. Without addressing the symptoms, then you still may be struggling with the exam, if that's the situation, right? And what are some general tips you would give someone who has ADHD symptoms or ADHD diagnosis?
Absolutely. There are some basic tips. Some of them we already talked about, but I can make a list. But I want to start with the first thing, which is, be really kind to yourself.
Mhm.
Usually people that have ADHD are very, very hard on themselves. And that makes it all the like that makes it harder, because then they are very frustrated very easily when they aren't able to do things, as quickly or as
Mm.
efficiently as they want to do it. So just be kind to yourself. Practice really doing one thing at a time. I know that for those of us that are neurodivergent, there's something that feels good about multitasking, and it's really not efficient. It's absolutely not efficient, in
Wow.
particular for detail-oriented things. It's really not. We already talked about minimizing distractions. So some of us are more distracted by certain things than others. So for example, for myself, I'm definitely distracted by noise, and I'm distracted by movement, by people kind of moving around. So I have to make sure that if I'm doing something that's very focused, that I don't really have people near me, or that I can kind of put myself in a way that I don't really see the movement around, because I'm nosy and I want to look around, and I don't really want to focus on what I'm doing. Um,
So mainly, step number one, become aware of
yes,
what is it that's distracting me. Maybe you're
absolutely.
picking the wrong thing, and lo and
Absolutely.
behold, there was something that's really distracting you that you never really, put the thought into it. Like,
Absolutely.
what
Most
is,
people that are neurodivergent do have particular things that they're more distracted by than
okay,
others.
interesting.
So yeah, I would absolutely, take some time to really kind of reflect and look around and really discover the things that you are more distracted by, or more kind of like thrown off by.
Mhm.
Definitely use technology to help you focus and organize yourself. We have
Okay.
so much technology now that is useful. There are so many apps that are useful.
Mm.
There are Pomodoro timer apps. There are apps that will automatically turn off all of your notifications for you, so you don't have to go through and do all of that. Um, there are apps that will create a whole schedule for you and a calendar so that you can follow, so that you don't have to, do all those kind of like smaller details. Um, Also, in terms of if you have a larger project that you have to do and you're struggling to do it, there are apps that have templates that will color code everything for you, that will automatically break projects into smaller goals for you. You can look for apps that are about project management. So people that are project
Mm.
managers as a profession, they create all kinds of really cool apps. And also Google Drive has a couple of
Oh, really?
templates that are useful. Yeah, they're really cool.
Mm.
You can look
Interesting.
for project management tools, or there's something that's called a Gantt chart. I forgot what the acronym stands for, but it's GANNT. If you're very visual, so I'm very visual, I like kind of seeing things played out. You can break a project into a timeline, and the Gantt chart will automatically do that for you. You just put in a list of the things that you need to do, and it'll break it down for you over time on like a really pretty visual timeline, so you can actually see your progress on things, and you know when you have to do things. That's how someone taught me how to finish my dissertation. I use a Gantt chart.
Oh wow. Right. I'm taking notes here.
Yeah.
Wow,
Use a
that's
planner.
great.
I mean, some of the things that are kind of more obvious, but I want to say them. Use a planner. You can't just get up in the morning. There are some people that can get up in the morning and just kind of know what they need to do. Those that are inattentive or neurodivergent absolutely cannot do that. Try to use a planner, keep everything in that one, whatever it is. I will say that paper planners are more useful. However, most people at this point kind of want to shift to technology. So it doesn't really matter what you use as long as you use it. Use it every day, help it to guide you, create a routine that you're doing. And I mean, those are kind of basic things.
No, you've given us so many tips. And my last question, because I want to ask you a million questions, but what are some study tips? I know we had our multitasking and our scheduling, but what are some like specific study tips? Someone with ADHD or
multisensory learning. So anything that's engaging more than one sense. So we have 5 senses, right? So for example, if you're very visual, create flashcards, color code your flashcards.
Hey, my flashcard videos.
Use flashcards. They work. They absolutely work. Use Dr. Shapiro's flashcards. They are really, really helpful. If you want to create some yourself, you can create them and color code them. I actually work with someone that color codes all of their stuff, and then that helps them to remember.
I have all these. I always help people.
Yes, absolutely.
When I'm doing my little tutoring.
Absolutely, because it helps your brain to put things into categories so that it's easier to remember. Videos, drawings. I have someone else that I work with that is in medical school, and they created a kind of like a shorthand for themselves. And it works. Yeah, it works because, and no one else understands it, but they do. And it helps them to remember things very quickly in a way that other people don't. If you're a very auditory person, listening to podcasts, audio tapes, exactly. Repeat information out loud as you're listening to it. Say it out loud over and over. It's another way that your brain is taking in the information.
Interesting.
Anything that you can touch. I know someone else that actually they had to take a class where they had to learn chemistry. They actually created models of things because they needed to feel it, to actually see it, tactile, and have some sort of tactile, stimulation. So yeah, whatever. And some of it is a little trial and error. Some of it, when we're testing, I can actually tell people you're a very visual learner or you're a very auditory learner. But without that input, trial and error and see what works, but definitely trying to use all of your senses. And even this is something kind of it sounds silly, but it absolutely works. Your sense of smell is very powerful. So when you sit down to study, if there is a scent or like an odor that you find very soothing or very calming or helps you to focus, absolutely sit down and take some of that and kind of like breathe it in to kind of get yourself into a space where you're more focused, and then start to do your work. It's actually very helpful.
So not like a bag of fries or anything next to you?
I mean, if you find the smell of McDonald's French fries, which I do, to be a very amazing scent, then absolutely, yes. But I will say, people drink coffee to help focus and to give energy. The scent of coffee beans, the scent of coffee, actually, the scent of coffee can give you almost as much energy and focus as actually drinking the coffee itself.
Interesting.
Just if you have
because
coffee
coffee is a stimulant, And it's
Yep.
the stimulant is what is helps you focus.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Depends on how your brain is wired, right?
Yes, actually, absolutely. You
Mhm.
can't get overstimulated because then you get jittery, kind of
Right.
like if you have too many cups of coffee or something and you
Of
get jittery.
course.
It has to be just right. But
Right.
you can actually just take in the scent of coffee beans or even
Mhm.
citrus.
That's interesting.
Stimulating. Yeah.
That's very interesting. No, there's I think ADHD is sometimes overlooked, and it's such a broad part of psychology or mental health, right?
Yes.
Because there's so many components. There's biological, genetic, and also you could address it with so many different ways. Also, there's natural ways to
Absolutely. There are actually naturopaths
yeah,
that specialize in ADHD that will make recommendations. They'll make nutritional recommendations.
right,
They'll make supplement
nutritional.
recommendations. Yes,
I think you
absolutely.
told me about that once about the allergies.
Yes. Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
Possibly there might be some.
There are some people that might have some sensitivities or some allergies to certain types of like foods and things like that that can exacerbate and make worse,
Mhm.
ADHD types of symptoms. So yeah, absolutely.
This is great. I know Dr. Laracuenta-Hernandez. She's given us so much, oh my goodness, so much information today. Very valuable. Your expertise is amazing. And also, I'm so glad you're my first guest, actually. And I want you to tell everyone that's listening today, how could they contact you? I mean, if they want more of what you have, they need help. How can they contact you? Tell us where your
Absolutely.
website, your email.
Absolutely. The easiest way is to either go to my website or to email us. So my website is www.mlhpsychology.com or can email at admin. So it's AD as in dog, MIN at mlhpsychology.com.
That's awesome. And I know you have don't you have because I'm always just looking at your
Yeah.
posts. I know you have
I
Instagram.
have my
What's your
Instagram
IG?
as well. My IG. Okay, I have two IGs
I
actually.
saw
So
the
my IG,
Pomodoro, right? You put the
yes, out with the
Pomodoro.
Pomodoro. We just
Yeah,
post
that's where
so we're finishing up. So my Instagram account for testing and for learning in ADHD is MLH Psych Testing.
Mhm.
And we actually just finished a focus in July on ADHD. So we
Nice.
posted a number of different tips,
There
some
you
information
go.
on psychological testing, and then that's going to continue this month. Next month is going to be a focus on learning disabilities. So we're going to be posting some helpful
Great.
hints and some information then as well.
Nice. So I'm going to welcome you guys back because we still have a lot to talk about. It's just the
Absolutely.
beginning, and you're giving us such valuable information for myself and for all my bootcamp students. We appreciate your many, many years of being with us and helping us.
Thank you.
And I cannot wait for our next interview with you. Thank you so much, Melissa, Dr.
Me
Melissa.
too.
It's a
Thank
pleasure
you
always
for
being with you.
welcoming me always and for always entrusting me with working with your boot campers and with collaborating together. It's always been so amazing.
I'm pretty sure they'll be very happy when they see this video. They'll be like, oh, there she is. I mean, you've helped people over 10 years ago. We've had the boot camp for 16 years
It
and
has been
yeah,
long,
and you've
right?
helped so many. They would have never passed their exam if it wasn't for your help and my help.
And your help
Both, a
too.
combination,
We're a
right?
great team. We're a great team.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we will see you soon, Dr. Melissa. Thank you so much again. Enjoy the weekend.
Thank
Enjoy
you
the
for having
cafecito.
me.
And
You
we will
too.
see you
Cafecito in
soon.
a few minutes. Yes.
Yes. Thank you everyone for staying tuned. And we will
Thank
see
you.
you in your next video.